Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We're so pleased that you could join us. My name is Allison O'Connor. I'm with CSU Extension in Larimer County, and I am joined by my cohorts, Tony Koski and Cassie Anderson. Just have a few things to tell you before we launch into our presentation today by Dr. Jim Klett. And with that, I'm going to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Jim Klett. Dr. Klett was a professor in the Department of Horticulture and Landscape Architecture at CSU until he retired last year, and now he is Professor Emeritus. He has done decades of research with woody plants, including trees and shrubs, and he is going to dazzle us today with information about shrubs for Colorado. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Klett, and I'll let you take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Allison, and I'm glad to be here to talk about shrubs for Colorado landscapes. This, as you'll see here from the next slide, is I put together some criteria that I came up with for the inclusion of these plants. Over my 40+ years that I was at CSU in the Department of Horticulture and Landscape Architecture, I was in charge of plant evaluation, both woody plants and herbaceous plants. But today we're going to talk about woody plants and especially some shrubs that over the years that I think are probably a little more underutilized, either as a shrub or a possibility of small trees, since I think it's so important today with the landscape sizes that we have here around homes, how these could be utilized a lot more. And also they're suited for the front range, mainly up to about 6,000 feet. If a couple of them will do better at higher elevations, I will mention that also. Another feature is that I always look for a lot in shrubs is multiple seasons of interest. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is, we have 4 different seasons here in Colorado normally, and you would want to have some spring, summer, fall, and winter actual interest. So that could include, as we'll talk about, flowers, fruit, fall color, winter twig texture, and so forth. All of those things make up what I consider ornamental features. So in considering the plants here today, I tried to pick plants that have done well for us, plus also have good ornamental features throughout at least 2 or 3 of the seasons. Also, given the size of landscapes that we have today, often that they require a little less growing space. Some of them are going to be more dwarf. Other ones are going to be a little larger that would make good for a screen planting. So we'll talk about that. Now, most of these plants are going to be available at most of your independent garden centers or nurseries. There may be a couple that might be a little more limited, and if so, I will mention them also. But that was kind of the criteria that I came up with in choosing the plants that we're discussing here today. Also, most of the plants that we're talking about have been trialed here at the Heritage Arboretum on the campus. It's directly west of the stadium, the football stadium there, or they could have been also south of our horticultural center over the years. So they have been trialed and also have been given pretty good results and have maybe been talked about to the industry also, hopefully that they are again now selling these or at least getting them into their inventory. So let's get on with the plants. And I have put these in alphabetical order, basically by genus. I think everybody likes amelanchiers. They're called Serviceberry. Sometimes they're called Juneberry. And if you're looking in the landscapes along the Front Range right now, most of them are coming into bloom. The one that I'm talking about is one called Standing Ovation. This is one that the Amelanchier alnifolia is actually native here to the Great Plains up to Manitoba. And this cultivar, oval sec or standing ovation, has a unique growth habit. And that's why I chose this one to talk about. You're going to see that it has multiple seasons of interest. You have flowers now, basically in May and April. On south sides of homes, they were blooming probably a couple weeks ago, now probably in a little more shaded areas coming into bloom along the Front Range. You're going to see nice foliage in the summer and then very good fall color, turning kind of a red to an orange. But what makes this different is the growth habit. It's more upright, has kind of an oval habit to it, to upright, and it's going to add that vertical accent to a landscape. So I have seen this maturing about 10 to 12, maybe taller than that in height, but not very wide, 3 to 4 foot. Amelanchiers, ideally sun, but they'll take some shade. And this cultivar is actually a selection of a native one here in Colorado. I look at it as a plant that could be used as a little more of an informal hedge or screen planting. And as I mentioned, it's pretty darn cold hardy down to zone 2. So here we can look at the plant and you can see it at various stages of development. Initially, if you were going to go to the garden center and purchase one of these, it'd be like the picture on the left, maybe 3 foot or so. And then after several years, probably 4 to 5 years, you'd see the picture on the right of how it has more of that upright habit. And also you can see it's in the spring with that very nice white flower. It's kind of a, actually technically, I think it's a raceme that's kind of a nodding type of a raceme. So if we look close, you can see that it's in the Rosaceae family, the Amelanchiers, so they would be alternate leaves, kind of oval, pretty good green color, sometimes even have a little more of a bluish gray tinge to them when they're emerging. But you can see the flowers are quite attractive here, basically April into May along the Front Range. Then you can see, like I said, I like the all-season effect that we can have. Normally, you will get a fairly nice fall color, anywhere from this kind of an orange to a red, and it's kind of mid-fall when you get it. Then you notice also the fruit. They kind of look like blueberries. They're edible. They are originally a lot of times more of reddish color, and then they'll go to that bluish purple to sometimes to a black color that you have. So it's one of those all-season shrubs. This one I like mainly because of the more upright growth habit that you have that way. So a good one for sun or a semi-shaded area and for a screening purpose in a landscape, this. And winter texture, the stems are kind of a more of a grayish color. You can identify Amelanchiers too. In the winter, they generally will have a little more of a sharp pointed, kind of a reddish purple scaly bud. So Amelanchier, then we have here Serviceberry or Juneberry, but this one more upright in habit. Well, the second one I want to talk about is another plant called Aronia melanocarpa, or black chokeberry. A lot of people are familiar, of course, with choke cherries. This is chokeberry, and generally going to be smaller in habit both about 3 to 5 foot or so in height. And then width, they have a tendency a lot to sucker or spread to make kind of almost a kind of a ground cover. The flowers, which you'll see, are pink in bud, and then they open to white. And then again, it's a member of the Rosaceae family. You get a fruit that's purplish black. That's why it's called black chokeberry. That's edible. It also gets nice fall color, which is a nice red. So again, this is what I would consider kind of an all-season shrub. It is good for a little more moist soils, but it can tolerate drier sides. About zone 3 to 7 that you have. Besides the straight genus species, there are numerous clonal selections of this. And the first one, Autumn Magic, is a little dwarfer in size and gets good fall color and purple-red fruit, as you'll see. The Morton, which is also known as Iroquois Beauty, is more of a compact form too. And Viking it's about 3 to 4 foot and has good black fruit. So basically these clones have been selected out maybe for their fruit color or also their size. Well, let's take a look at some of the pictures of black chokeberry. Here you can see it as a shrub. And as I mentioned, it's 3 to 4 foot, has a tendency to sucker to some extent. You can see they're going to have flowers that are going to be pink to white, and they're at this time of the year too, April into May. But why is it called black chokeberry is the fruit. But you can first see a close-up of the flower in the upper right-hand picture, how the buds were pink, then they open to white. And then on the far left, you see the immature fruit, which is going to be midsummer, which is greenish. And then over a period of time, it turns to reddish to purple to black, as the name is implied. Often you'll have pedicels too that hold the fruit that are a little more reddish in color, and they can persist a little too into the winter. Now with black chokeberry, besides these ones, there are some other species of Aronia called prunifolia, which even gets larger in size, but has the same flowers and fruit to them. And then just recently, there have been some introductions that are more ground covers of Aronia that are just about 12 inches to 15 inches in height. I'm personally going to try some of them in my own yard because they'll take a little more of a semi-shaded area. Well, you might say too, how do I identify this in the winter? Well, they have very distinctive terminal buds that are going to be scaly, but kind of more reddish in color and pointed on this black chokeberry. So it's again one of these shrubs that I consider to be pretty darn good for all season that we have of ornamental features. And some now are smaller, the medium or small to medium, and then there are some species that are taller also in height. So Aronia melanocarpa. There you can see the fall color and the fruit also, very attractive. Well, let's talk about barberries. I've in the collection up here at CSU, we have a lot of different barberries, but there's one that has stood out over the years that I really like. And it's this one called Emerald Carousel. Emerald Carousel, there's been other ones put out now in this same category called Burgundy Carousel, but this one, Emerald, has more of a green leaf to it. So there's been some breeding work done up in Minnesota, especially at a large nursery there at Bailey Nursery, where they hybridized the Berberis thunbergii, which is the Japanese barberry, which is very common in the trade, especially some of the purple leaf forms, and then one that gets a lot more vigorous and larger called the Korean barberry that has a very distinctive flower and fruit to it. So what they've done is they've crossed this, and it's called Emerald Carousel, and it gets a really nice green foliage color to it. But the fall is really a very outstanding red to purple. The other thing is you'll see is the flowers. Most barberries are not going to have very showy flowers. This one has a very showy little drooping raceme flower. It grows 4 to 5 foot. You're going to see the growth habit, kind of arching branches, and it'll grow preferably in sun is best to light shade. And like a lot of the barberries, it's a little more adaptable to most soils. It'll take some drought also, this Emerald Carousel barberry. We've had it for numerous years. Here's a picture of it in the Arboretum with the other barberries around it. And as you can notice in the late spring, when it's coming into bloom, it has a very showy yellow flower, which most barberries are not going to have that showy of a flower. That's, I think, with the hybridization that we got here with the Korean as half of its parent. And then late into the fall and into the winter months, you can see the fruit, this red berry-like fruit that you have, and it can persist, as you can see there, with snow on the stems that could add, and it's pretty nice. They'll have some spines, but the birds eventually will get to it also with this Emerald Carousel barberry. Fall color is also very outstanding. So it's again one of those all-season shrubs, basically having good spring, summer, fall, and even winter with the fruit persisting on this Emerald Carousel barberry. Well, buddleias. Most people think of buddleias as a smaller plant that, of course, tracks butterflies and blooms mid to late summer. Well, this is a different species of buddleia. It's Buddleia alternifolia, and it's the cultivar called Argentea. It's the silver fountain butterfly bush. Now, this buddleia was a plant select plant back in '98, about the 4th or 5th year that the program was introduced, and it's a little larger size buddleia. It has, as you'll see from the slides, a nice fountain type of growth habit. Foliage color is also kind of unique, more silvery gray, but the one main outstanding feature of this is the flowers. And it is one that blooms on previous growth. So in other words, you wouldn't want to prune this shrub in the winter or you would be taking off the flowers. It likes sun, does best, and it's a larger shrub. The previous ones I talked about were dwarfer, and it's basically zone 5 to 7. Here you can see the mature size of it and when it's in bloom. That's its major ornamental feature. And you can see it's a larger shrub, but it's outstanding with this lavender purple flowers that you have. You'll see that the foliage also is a little more silvery gray color to it. The fruit is not important or kind of inconspicuous as far as any ornamental feature goes. There you can see a close-up of it, and you can see the leaf too, how it's a little more silvery green color. Attracts a lot of pollinators and butterflies. However, once they get done blooming, it's just a shrub that doesn't really have a lot of great interest as far as fall color or winter texture. It's one that I would consider maybe as a little accent point in a landscape. It's a larger shrub, and for that beautiful bloom that you'd have here, basically, again, in May into June on previous year's wood. But as you could see from the previous pictures, it's just covered with those nice lavender purple flowers. So that's Buddleia argentea, the butterfly bush that we have here. Silver fountain, it kind of looks that way with the silvery leaves. Boxwoods. Well, when I first came to Colorado, we didn't really have hardly any boxwoods, or they had to be in a very protected spot. And still, I don't go on records recommending planting a lot of boxwoods, especially in very exposed areas. But in more protected spots, there are a couple boxwoods that will do all right here. And we've had trials out at our annual trial gardens in the perennial section that we've looked at these. And about 2 years ago, we had a lot of death, but a couple of them came through to look a lot better. Well, the one I've listed here is a hybrid, but there's several boxwoods that have a little better cold hardiness. But this one is called Julia Jane, and it's named after the first woman landscape architect in the state of Colorado. And it's a hybrid, and I believe it was from some nursery people initially that Larry Watson and others that had this, that promoted it, and then I think the Colorado chapter of the ASLA named this then Julia Jane in honor of the first landscape architect woman in the state, or registered one. But it has good foliage during the summer. It's a little more lime color, turns bronzy in the winter, and these boxwoods seem to be a little more deer resistant. It's not real large. It gets about 3 foot by 3 foot, and it's a little more tolerant of our environmental conditions. It'll take some shade, but I caution everybody about boxwoods is that they're going to need a more protected spot from the wind and winter sun. When I was in charge of the garden where the broadleaf evergreens were, I would often put up a burlap windscreen around them that they wouldn't get so much burn on them in the winter months. This picture here of the 3 of them with the snow on is a picture from in front of the old Shepherdson building, which is now Nutrient on our campus. And you can see the color that you'd have on it versus the one on the right, which is showing a little more later in the winter with that. I want to say from a personal note, I've tried growing Julia Jane, and I planted 3 of them like this, and I've lost one and had a little damage on the other, just because I probably did not winter water and give enough protection to them in the winter. So boxwoods, protected spots, a little more care, especially in the winter months, to get them to come through if we have those sudden changes in temperature. Julia Jane, one that is a little more adaptable to this area. Well, if you've seen anything like in March or April that had a lot of yellow flowers on when you're driving around the Front Range, and it wasn't a forsythia, it could have been Cornus moss, the Cornelian cherry dogwood. This one has very nice yellow flowers very early. It's one of the first signs of spring. Very attractive foliage also during the summer, has very prominent venation. And it's called Cornelian cherry dogwood because you get this cherry fruit midsummer. Now, a lot of times we'll have a late frost that'll kill the flowers and you won't get any fruit set. But some years it could be very heavily fruited. This could be grown as a shrub or, as you'll see, as a small tree. There are some cultivars that are selected out, like Green Glory and so forth, that are a little more dense and compact. It's very adaptable to our soils also and pretty cold hardy. So as we look at it, one of the things you're going to see in the winter are these buds that are rounded and scaly. Those are all the flower buds because it's going to bloom on wood that before the leaves come out. Then this is what you get in very early spring. Often here, it could be February or March, depending on how early or late the springs are. And you can see up in the upper left-hand corner, smaller plants in the arboretum, and then you can see how they could even be pruned into a small tree or a multi-stem larger shrub. It's quite a sight to see in the spring when it's in bloom. So with the Cornelian cherry dogwood, Cornus moss, if we look at a close, you can see a close-up of the flower. You can see the leaves during the summer that are pretty good green color with venation, deeper. And then as you see, why it's called Cornelian cherry dogwood is the fruit, which is a very nice red color. And I should say the birds love it. We had one of these in front of the Shepherdson building before it was remodeled. And the birds would just love that June, July if we had a good fruit set and the flowers didn't get frosted. On the right, you see a cultivar that's a little more upright in growth habit. There are quite a few clonal selections of Cornus moss. Cotoneasters. A lot of people, you hear them say cotoneaster, but think the correct pronunciation is cotoneaster. Intergramius, the European cotoneaster. Well, this is a larger cotoneaster, and like most of the cotoneasters, will have pink flowers that are kind of in nodding clusters. The fruits, it's again a member of the Rosaceae or rose family, so you have fleshy fruits that are going to be red, and you'll see the leaves coming out are kind of green with a little more thinly pubescent grayish hairs. It's a larger shrub. It's cold hardy that you have here, since it's native to Central and Eastern Europe. And with this, does all right in sun or part shade. I like it as kind of a shrub for a shrub border, or even maybe as a windbreak. As you can see here, the leaves have a little more of a hairiness to them, or pubescent as they call that, giving it a little more of a grayish appearance. And then you can see, like most of the cotoneasters, the flowers are a light pink, maybe fade to more of a whitish color, but not real showy, the flowers. This is showing you the size, and you can see they can be very heavily fruited. And also will do very well in a more of a harsher environment. And you can see it's a member of the Rosaceae family, like an apple. You can see how the calyx is split at the base of that fruit. Not as common as a cotoneaster, like cranberry cotoneaster, that is sold a lot, or some of the dwarf forms of cotoneaster, like hedge cotoneaster. This gets a little larger, and I think has a nice leaf color, plus fairly heavily fruited, but probably not as common as a couple of the other cotoneasters, but also very good in a drought and difficult sites. Another plant that gets a little larger that could be used multiple ways in the landscape is this plant called Foresteria neomexicanum. Well, this is native here to Colorado and that way all the way into Texas and northern Mexico. It's a plant that is dioecious. And what I mean when I say dioecious, I mean that the male flowers and the females are on two different plants. So you only get fruit set then on the female. They have little yellow flowers in the spring. And I like it because it also has a very attractive bark that's a lighter tan color to it. You'll see from the slides how could be pruned into a multi-stem tree, and it's very drought tolerant. And the other thing, very adaptable to our higher soils, pHs, alkaline soils. They have done very well in the Arboretum. I have some in my own yard that have been there 30, 40 years that have done excellent with this Foresteria. Let's look at it. There you can see it in the spring, and you can see all those buds that are going to be the flowers, and then a close-up of that flower. But then just on the female plants is where you're going to get that fruit set. And you can see it's kind of a blue to purple color. You can also see that the leaves kind of a medium green color, a little more lanceolate or a long, narrow shape to the leaf. Here you can see how they're grown, often sold as a container shrub. The lower left-hand picture is in a native site down more in the southwestern part of Colorado. And then you can see the bark, how you could possibly prune this up to be a multiple stem, larger shrub to show also the unique bark feature that you would have. So it could be used multiple ways. A lot of people think of this as kind of a replacement for the privet hedges and so forth. A European privet or even the Cheyenne privet, it's fairly common here because it's more adaptable, native, and more drought tolerant. So has a lot of uses that way and can even take some shearing if you want to use it in a more formal setting. Foresteria neomexicanum. There you can again see some additional plants being grown as a large shrub as an accent point in xeric landscapes and xeriscapes. Hibiscus, well, this is a plant, of course, a lot of people have as house plants, but the species Syriacus is more of a woody plant. And there are several of these hibiscus that have come out now from especially Proven Winners and other sources, other nurseries that have good flowers on them. And these now bloom on new wood, not old wood that you have. I picked one of them called Purple Pillar just because of the growth habit and the way that people need to have more upright plants for the smaller lot sizes. So this one can get 10 to 12, 15 foot in height, but only 2 to 3 foot or so in width. It's a good vertical accent shrub. Does best in sun, and it'll tolerate some heat and dry once it's established. The flowers are a little short-lived, but tend to be, most of them are double mid to late summer, and then they'll get to be more single late into the fall. So if we look at these, here you can see the growth habit, what makes it so unique, this purple pillar. It's upright in habit. And everybody likes hibiscus. You know, there's so many of them that get the dinner plate size, but this could also be a screen planting for late summer, early fall color. And you can see initially a lot of the flowers are double and then they go to be more single. But one that probably doesn't have the best ornamental features in spring and early summer, but late summer into the fall is when you have all these flowers coming that are so exceptional and beautiful. You can see on the left the double flower, on the right the single flower that you get later into the fall season. Hibiscus syriacus purple pillar, a good clone, I think, for that more upright habit, kind of like the standing ovation Amelanchier we talked about earlier. Hydrangeas, also, a lot of breeding work done on hydrangeas, and this is a paniculata type that is the panicle, not the arborescens, which is lower. These are larger shrubs that can get up to 8 foot or more. But of course, you grow the hydrangeas for their flowers. And again, this is kind of like hibiscus, not going to look very good in the spring, early summer, but it's going to be later into the summer, into the fall, when you get the flower on it that's a great ornamental feature. There's this cultivar called Limelight, that of the paniculata types, and there's been many of them that have been introduced by nurseries, I think it comes to the top. It's done fairly well in our trials here. Now, all of them are going to like a little more moist, well-drained site. They'll grow in the sun, but they'll also tolerate some shade. I know I have in my own yard that I've been putting in hydrangeas where it's kind of a semi-sunny area and get some shade. And I was going to see how some of these new cultivars do. This one is zone 4 to 5. And let's look at the plant. Now you can see why it's called Limelight. In the mid to late summer, the flower, which is a very large panicle inflorescence, is that kind of a greenish white color. And then as it matures later into the summer, you're going to see that more pink to white color coming through. Here are the ones in the arboretum later in the season. They're fairly young plants. This was taken a couple years ago. And excuse me, you can see how they're putting on a little more of a pinkish cast now on the plant. I like these hydrangeas because mid to late summer into the fall, you get some good color. Now, some people don't like the fruits, the little capsule fruit that turns brown, and they'll cut them off. Other people will leave them on for the winter, for winter texture. It's kind of entirely up to the homeowner if they prefer it or not, but they bloom on new wood every year. Now, this is an old-fashioned plant that probably I don't think gets enough recognition, called Colwitzia amabilis. It's called beauty bush, and I think they've changed the genus on it to Linnea now amabilis. You'll see it both ways. Well, it's called beauty bush, in my opinion, because it's beautiful for a couple weeks in late spring, early summer. It's a larger shrub, kind of like that cotoneaster I talked about, that has this kind of an upright arching habit. And you do get some fall color, and you get this very unusual brown little capsule fruit that persists. It likes sun, it's pretty disease and insect free, and a medium moisture. And as you're going to see, it gets very exfoliating bark also. So it's a larger shrub that we have. Let's look here. Here you can see it in the arboretum. And why it's called beauty bush is when it's in bloom, it has these pink flowers with yellow throat. You can also see in the upper left-hand picture how big they can get. It's a bigger shrub. and that upright arching habit. And then you can see also the bark on the older specimens, it becomes very exfoliating. Some people would like it, other ones wouldn't. But it does get that very exfoliating bark on very mature specimens. Here you can see the flower, why it's called beauty bush, just totally covered. And then about midsummer, you start to get some fruit set. And this fruit, it's a little dehiscent capsule, but it looks like chicken feet coming out. That's what I always told the students. It's really kind of hard to identify in the winter, kind of a nondescript twig, but the fruit often persists, which is totally different than any other shrub, it seems like, on this beauty bush. So it's kind of an old-fashioned shrub that may be in a landscape as a background plant, but when it's in bloom, it's very noticeable and a real eye catcher because it's so covered with these flowers. Coetzea amabilis, beauty bush. Ninebarks. Well, with ninebarks, there's been a lot of them introduced also recently, hybrids. This one, Center Glow, is one that's a cross between the common Diablo, which is a purple leaf form, and Dart's Gold, which is a yellow form, and it came from the University of Minnesota's Plant Development Center, where they were breeding a lot of different shrubs or making crosses on them. Ninebarks are very adaptable to our soils. It gets close to 8 foot in height, 6 foot in width, but it has this nice accent of color, as you'll see. You'll see in the nurseries too, that sometimes they're being pruned into little small trees. Very cold hardy to zone 3. The flowers and fruit, as you'll see too, are kind of nice. So on Center Glow, here you can see how you would get it basically as a shrub. The leaves have this red wineish color with some yellow center to them, and very distinctive. And then they mature a little more towards that purplish cast. There you can see the younger leaves that I was mentioning with that kind of yellow center coming from that dark golden, the purple from the Diablo. And then ninebark, as the common name implies, you can see it's a very exfoliating bark. It almost has 9 different layers, and that's why it's given this common name, ninebark. But Center Glow, as you can see here, is a nice one for that foliage color. Now, besides that, also, you do get flowers that are pinkish, as you can notice, midsummer, and then you'll get a little capsule fruit that's initially a little more red, but then it turns brown as it matures and holds on during the winter. So it's kind of one of those all-season shrubs again. Flowers, fruit, leaf color, and then also some winter texture with the exfoliating bark that you have. So the Center Glow, this new hybrid, ninebark. Roses. Well, there's been a lot of roses introduced that are shrub roses that we have. And this series called Easy Elegance. These are basically bred from a breeder from Bailey Nursery, and for their good flower color and foliage and the disease resistance. They're pretty cold hardy to zone 4, and they seem to be a little more cold tolerant than the knockout roses. They have fragrant flower buds, prolific blooms, as you'll see, and they don't require a lot of deadheading like you'd have with the hybrid tea or floribunda roses. And they bloom over a long period of time if given some additional fertilizer during the growing season. They're cold hardy, they're on their own root, and basically zone 4 to 5. They're going to do better in sun, however, than in really shaded location. We got a bunch of these for trial, and we had them in the Arboretum over here. This is the rose-colored one, and you can see the abundance. And the nice thing that I've seen with these Easy Elegance is they kind of bury their dead. We didn't have to deadhead them, and they continue to get a lot of flowers on them. So you can get them in different colors. Here's the rose-colored one too. You can see deep in bud, fade. So these Easy Elegant type of roses, I think, are some of the hardy shrub roses to consider. You can see this is in the Heritage Arboretum fairly recently, and they put the practice field for the football people directly to the east of our Arboretum. I'm going to finish up with a couple viburnums that I like. Viburnums are some of my favorite shrubs. And this viburnum, again, is a hybrid that we have called Emerald Triumph. It's a cross between Allegheny, which is one that has gained a lot of popularity, and Viburnum atum, which has a little more rounded form. This also is a selection from the University of Minnesota Arboretum, working, I think, a lot with Bailey Nursery. Been around for a while. It has pretty good leaf color, and it's not as textured as the wayfaring tree viburnum. White flowers, good fruit that you'd have, and a nice emerald color to the leaf. And then you'll get fall color. So it's, again, one of those all-season shrubs, about 8 foot in height, 8 foot in width. Like sun, and that's true for most of these viburnums, to get better flowers and fruit on them, and pretty cold hardy to zone 4. There you can see the flowers, nice white flower, as you can see after the leaves come out. Round here, it'd probably be in mid to late May. Doesn't have as much fragrance as some, but the leaves are a little thicker textured too, and a kind of a little more glossy green color on this Emerald Triumph. There's one in the Arboretum, probably in too shaded of a condition, where it's getting a little more open, but you can see the size. And then you'll get fruit set that'll go from a green to a red to purple. Now, a lot of these hybrid viburnums don't seem to get as an abundant amount of fruit as some of the straight genus species like Viburnum lantago or Viburnum lantana, or even Viburnum dentatum, the arrowwood, or the Ninebark, and also the wayfaring tree viburnum. But a nice plant that way, especially for that leaf color, plus flowers and some fruit. There you can see the fall color, also kind of a reddish purple. Nice, and you can see kind of the more mature growth habit. Well, the last plant I'll talk about today is the mini-man dwarf Manchurian viburnum. This has a very interesting heritage to it. Coming through Fort Collins Wholesale Nursery, Scott Skogerbo, they're the propagator. This was up at the Cheyenne Research Station, but prior to that, the Cheyenne Research Station, I believe, got it from up in Canada, and also there was a nurseryman in Montana that had it, and Plant Select picked this and has it also from 2016. I like it because it's dwarf, it's rounded, plus has a lot of nice ornamental features that we have on these shrubs for all season shrubs. The flowers, the fruit, the fall color, plus it's very cold hardy and very good for birds and bees also, and drought tolerance and deer resistance. So you put all that together, in a smaller shrub, I think it's a very outstanding one. Here you can see the flower on it in bud, and then going to full bloom, you can see the white flower, and then you can see the fruit set. Now, all these viburnums have a fleshy fruit. It's a drupe, and it'll eventually turn this red, and then it'll go to a purplish black color. But the other nice thing about this, there you can see a young one, the growth habit. It's more dense. And you can see the flower, and then later on into the season, you can see the leaves, the growth habit, and a little more of a purplish tinge that you'll get with it. So it's pretty drought tolerant, gets some flowers, some fruit, smaller size for a lot of the landscapes that we have today that will fit into those situations a little better and doesn't need a lot of additional care or pruning. There you can see a couple of the little older specimens that you have with it that way, and the fall color that you have on this mini man. Well, that kind of concludes at least the 15 or so shrubs that I picked for you today to take a look at. And I want to just say again, most of these will do very well along the Front Range of Colorado up to 6,000 feet. A couple of them, like the Boxwood, really would need a little more of a protected spot. But it was hard for me to pick 15 or so, but I tried to do some that are a little more unusual, newer clones, and also some that have good ornamental features really throughout all the different seasons. So I think with that, I'm probably going to turn this back over to Allison to see if there's questions or if people have comments about these shrubs. And again, most of them will be available at most of the nurseries, independent nurseries around. You won't find all of these like at big box stores as much, but at independent garden centers, you would probably see most of them available.
So Jim, thank you so much. That was like a brain dump of 43 years. That was amazing. A couple questions for you. Have you found in general, because I know we do have deer in the Arboretum, but are most of the viburnums deer or elk resistant?
They seem to be more deer resistant. Yes, the viburnums. Yeah, we do now since they built high-rise apartments on both sides. We don't get quite as many deer coming into the Arboretum, but that way. They like sumacs and things like that a lot more, it seems like, the deer. Mhm.
Okay. And you mentioned a few shady shrubs. Viburnums, privet, barberries can take some shade. Do you have any others off the top of your head that could be good choices for shade and maybe a little smaller in size?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, there's some of these aronias that'll do fairly well. There's a lot of broadleaf evergreens also that people could consider, like the manzanitas and so forth, and a little more shady, the bearberries and so forth, that would add some winter texture and so forth also that way. I mentioned that aronia or black chokeberry, berry rather, that could take a little more shade on it. I've also grown some weigelas that I think will be a little more shade tolerant also too. There are some examples that
Great.
come to mind.
You didn't bring it up in your talk, but obviously Colorado has a lot of lilacs. So any favorite cultivars you could recommend?
Well, there are so many now, and I just think of the people back in the Arnold Arboretum. Sunday is Lilac Sunday, and I just read a press release. They have 500 different cultivars planted out there. But lilacs, of course, the Meyer lilac is a little dwarfer and very dependable for a little smaller but very fragrant flowers to it also. And then there's so many hybrids that we've got today also in all different colors and fragrance. It's hard to pick one or two that way. And very adaptable to our climates and our soils here.
Yeah, lilacs are fantastic. And then with privets, to tell if they're male or female, it would be the females would have the fruit, correct?
That's correct. Yes, on the that way. But and I think a lot of people generally what you'll see with that New Mexico privet is they will often plant a couple seedlings in the container instead of just having one that you would probably get some that would set fruit for you that way. And like a number 5, they may have 2 or 3 seedlings in there to get that you'd get fruit set. Kind of like what you think with bittersweet and so forth too, that you could have.
And finally, depending on where people live in the Front Range, we should be seeing some signs of life on our shrubs. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, some are a lot later to break dormancy than the early spring blooming ones. Hibiscus is one that I talked about that's very late in breaking dormancy. So don't think that it's the best way to tell is just take your thumbnail and look in the twig and see if you have green inner bark, then you know it's alive and it's just slow in breaking dormancy on some of them, like blue spireas and so forth like that, that bloom in the fall or later in breaking dormancy in the spring.
All right. Well, we do have a publication on native shrubs if that's something you're interested in. So just do a search for native shrubs Colorado and you should be able to find that resource. Other than that, Jim, thank you so much for doing this for us. Love to hear from the expert professor. In the chat, I'm going to put up the link to our upcoming webinars. This one has been recorded. We will make sure it gets posted when it's been converted and put on YouTube. And join us Friday with John Mergel or any time coming up in the future. So thanks again for joining us. I hope you have a great spring and gardening season.